Well, I think we got everybody covered.
Think
Shall we
so.
jump in, Aaron?
Yeah, we'll get started. So welcome, good morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about engaging board members in high impact fundraising today. The chat is open. So if you have questions, if you have some responses, we're going to be utilizing the chat. Also, we are recording this. If you would like a copy of it, you can share with a board member to refer to later. Send me a message. I can send you a link for that afterwards. So we're going to jump in here. I'm going to arrange my windows appropriately so I can see everything. Want to welcome my co-host Kent Stroman as well. We're both going to be sharing with you this morning. And here's a quick overview. Some of the things that we'll be going over today, how we help raise funds, how we hinder fundraising, tips for engaging volunteers, and equipping the team to work together. And we are excited to jump into this with you. So let's get started. This is going to be this is the first way that we love to see everyone interact with the chat room. But for you personally, what's your number one challenge engaging board members in fundraising? So if you were to finish this sentence, my number one challenge when it comes to engaging board members in fundraising is fill in the box. And we still got some people logging on, but that question right there, go and take some time to fill it in the chat box. Helping people get over the fears of the ask. Oh, that's a huge one. That is huge. There's huge fears when it comes to making asks. We will speak to that not only today, but probably in every other webinar we do. Oh, their time. Yeah. Jim Schmidt talked about time. That's probably one of our most precious commodities that we have. Time, busy board members. Yep. Other people have that as well. Confidence to ask for support. Understanding their buy-in is critical. Yep. That's huge. That was from Josie. Yeah. If the board isn't bought in, that's a huge hindrance. Better recruitment. Recruiting is very important, Gene.
Gene, where did you come up with that idea?
Okay. Well, Kent, we got a lot. Oh, expectation staff does it better. Yeah, that comparison game as well. I'm just a volunteer, isn't the staff? Aren't they the professionals? Aren't they getting paid for this? Okay, so I'm going to take the risk at making an assumption, but I'm going to assume if you have that same challenge, other people on the call do as well. So you are not alone in this. We're going to unpack some of these, some of them improv, some of them we already got planned for. So we're going to continue to dive into it. But here's a big question, and Kent, maybe you can help us answer this question, but how do we help and hinder fundraising? So next slide.
Yeah, so
help and hinder fundraising.
And the next slide is just gone. But here's the question. And again, I want to ask people if you'll just jump into the chat box. When you think about volunteers, we're primarily focused on board members, but don't limit your thoughts to that. When we think about how volunteers can help or hinder fundraising, I'm just curious, what's your experience? Now, no names, please. We're being kind to ourselves and each other, but whether it's theoretical or real life experience, what are some ways that that you see volunteers either help or hinder fundraising? I'm going to take just a moment so people have time to reply real quick, and then we're just going to start to unpack that just a little bit. Can
you throw that slide on the screen, or is it
yeah,
gone?
Yeah, let me put it back on there.
If you want to throw in the chat box the answer.
Where did that go? So someplace. There we go. How do we help and hinder fundraising? So taking a look at the chat box.
Yep. Hinder, not educated in the branding and format of nonprofit fundraising goals and wording. Wording, that's from Deb. That wording matters. Nancy said opening doors. Kelly, poor communication. Yep. I think the lack of confidence can hinder progress. Absolutely. That's from Shannon. Making connections is so helpful. And Eileen said SEW because she is with the sewing labs. There's a little pun there. Good. That's punny, Eileen. Jean said help, teaming up, mentoring. Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to just, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, give us a chance to maybe be a little bit more face-to-face in this process and talk just a little bit more about the how we help and how we hinder fundraising. And thank you for sharing those thoughts. Boy, they're so consistent with what we find across the board. Maybe that was punny too. In fact, today, this is Tuesday, on Friday, I was in Florida for a board workshop on solicitation training. And I love what Jean said, the idea of equipping and mentoring our volunteers. Probably the two biggest obstacles that I see in board members being really effectively involved in high impact fundraising. And they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay. So one is we don't know what to do, or we're not sure about that. And so we do nothing. And I'm just curious, real quick, show of hands. Actually, if you've got a camera, let me ask you to switch that on real quick. I want to see by show of hands who would relate to this. And that is when it comes to fundraising and engaging board members, somebody says, as the board member says, I really don't know how. I don't know how to raise funds, or I don't do that. It's kind of like I won't, right? So real quick, anybody have that experience?
I've seen hands go up.
Don't know how, or I just don't do that. Okay, really several of us, a lot of that. And so one of the things I want to just suggest, a lot of times it's easy to get frustrated, and rather than frustrated, I want to suggest that we equip. And so one of the things that we say is that board members are not equipped to do anything unless we have trained them to do that. Okay. And so sometimes people have been poorly equipped, and so they poorly perform because they're performing at their level of equipping. If we want people to be effective in asking for gifts, in making introductions, in creating connections, provide the training. Assume they don't have good skills and they don't have good education. So let's give them good skills, good equipping, good training. At the other end of the spectrum, oftentimes we find people are over engaged. Now, I'm going to use what I think is some bad language. So if you'll tolerate this, a lot of times in the boardroom, when it's time for us to focus on fundraising, somebody will raise his hand or her hand and say, I'll be glad to help out. Give me a dozen cards and I'll make some calls. And usually when that happens, the fundraising we're talking about is not high impact, because here's what is either spoken or unspoken. I'll go out, I'll make some calls. I will twist some arms. I'll hit people up. I've actually had somebody say, I'll go out and break some elbows. Well, that language makes it sound like that fundraising is about hurting people. We're going to hit them up. We're going to twist some arms. We're going to break some elbows. I don't know about you, but I've never found that kind of behavior to be productive when it comes to raising gifts, especially gifts for charitable purposes that are going to be long-term high impact. So one of the things that we want to say is how we can help fundraising is help adjust people's thinking and sometimes even our language. Let's stop hurting people and rather engaging them in the why. What is the why in our organization that if other people knew it, they would eagerly bring their resources to bear to move the mission forward? So some of the best things that we can do to help or hinder fundraising. One, the hindering is when we assume people, even in the boardroom, when we assume they know what to do, when to do it, and how to go about it. And to help it is that we bring resources alongside, provide preparation, training, education. Now, Aaron, I notice the clock keeps ticking right along. Anything that you want to add to the to that whole conversation about how we help and hinder?
I'm going to expand on some of that in the next tips that I'll give. So I think if you're ready, we can go on to the next.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Slides. So I got 4 tips for engaging volunteers. These will be, I'm going to give them in context of high impact fundraising, but the concepts will apply to any volunteers across your organization. Most nonprofits have a high leaning, high dependency on volunteers. So whether it's a board member for fundraising or parents leading the scout troop, the concepts will be across the board. Here they are. The first one, define the lane. We're going to talk about adequate training, monkey see, monkey do. I'll unpack that in a minute, and then autonomy. But the first one, define the lane. It is so important. And sometimes that term define the lane can be a little insulting, maybe. I don't know. A lot of times we think of stay in your lane as kind of a command, but defining the lane, when we engage our volunteers, especially board members in fundraising, it's so important that we define the lane. Now, board members have a lane defined for them already as they come onto the board, and those are called the bylaws. And they're very specific parameters in the responsibilities and expectations, tasks that the board members can take. And those are typically, not always, but typically really well written. But when we jump into a capital campaign, sometimes we are coming up with new committees or new roles, and we haven't given precise boundaries in which we want our volunteers to operate. It is very important to do that both in a written format and also to articulate that verbally over and over and over. You have to continue to speak that just so everyone's on the same page. If you don't, and you say to a volunteer board member, I want you to help fundraise, you'll get a variety of responses. One guy might go sit down at his computer and start doing graphic design and think that if I just have the right graphic, this is my contribution to fundraising. Another guy might go online and start a GoFundMe account for your nonprofit. And you might not even know about what's going on until you see it on social media and think, what is going on? So that's why it's very important to define the lane. Now, there may be multiple roles that your volunteers can step into when it comes to fundraising. But if you don't write it down, put it out there, basically for all eyes to see, and then hold the board accountable to the roles in which they volunteer to be in, it's really not fair to have any other expectations. So very important to write it down and then to continue to talk about it and make sure everyone is on the same page.
Hey, Aaron, let me, can I toss something in here real quick?
Yep.
One of the things that is often problematic, and I'm just curious, I can't see everybody in one screenshot, but again, if you would just by show of hands, who would say that in your role that you're primarily in a staff role, your CEO, development director, in that role, as opposed to a board member in terms of who's on the call right now? So just by show of hands. Okay. So I see a variety of each. One of the things that is often problematic, in fact, somebody used this example earlier or reference, and that is holding the board responsible. Here's just a quick caution and tip. Who can hold the board responsible? And what I want to suggest is that is not the role of the staff. And even though we want to sometimes in a staff role, we are disqualified. And so who can hold the board responsible is the board. And certainly different officers on the board, whether it's the board chair, the secretary, the chair of a development committee or whatever, can be a voice, but ultimately it's the job of the board to hold the board responsible. And so the thing that I want to suggest for those who are in a staff position, our job is to serve the board members and to help them do their job well. So we may prompt someone on the board and ask that question, how does the board want to bring accountability to the process? Anyhow, sorry for that, but I thought that back to defining the lane, in some ways, we've got that lane as well.
Yeah, that's a good, especially when we talk about accountability, that's great clarity. If you want more in-depth, I just pulled this off my desk here, the intentional board, that plus more in that book written by Kent Stroman. So thank you for that clarification. Once we define the lane, you talked about this already, Ken, but give adequate training. I don't know if you stole my words or if I stole yours, but here's a safe assumption we need to make. If you haven't equipped your board to do it, assume they cannot do it. If you haven't trained your board to do it, or your volunteers, it can be volunteers, assume they cannot do it. And the big point here is every once in a while, I mean, maybe once in a lifetime, you might have a rock star board member they're just fantastic at fundraising. They do it the right way. They get big gifts. They don't get gifts too early. They know how to take the appropriate steps in the appropriate order. But that's not the case. And a lot of times what we do is we attribute a career success in one sector and assume that translates into professionalism or expertise in another sector. And just because you may have a CEO of a high-tech organization doesn't mean that they're going to be a professional fundraiser in a nonprofit sector. And I mean, I've seen this in volunteers. Good friend that works here in Kansas City at Garmin. He executive, great at leading staff meetings. He volunteered for me and he wanted to lead a small group of middle school boys. It didn't translate staff meeting of professional, Garmin engineers to middle school boys. He had to be trained. Now, once he was trained, he was great at it, but how he started was not how he finished. So we have to train our volunteers in what we want them to do. So that adequate training. Now, here's the good news. Once we do the training, especially when it comes to fundraising, volunteers are very happy and confident to go out and have high stake conversations about high impact donations for the organization. And so if you can imagine volunteers, instead of being reluctant, like, I don't do that, that's someone else's job, to going, ooh, I'm excited. Let's start these conversations. Let's start building these relationships. Everything changes in the organization. It's a wonderful place to be, but the training has to come first. I'm going to keep.
Aaron, let me just toss something else in here. I think I already mentioned end of last week, a client $26 million campaign. We've got one of the board members and spouse, well-placed, eager, ready to be involved in fundraising. Here's what he wants to do. I've got 12 people. I want to run out and ask them for $1 million each, and that'll raise $12 million, right? Well, good news is he's motivated. He's willing. He's able. Here's the bad news. And every time we meet together, I bring this up with him. John, I want you to ask the 12 people for $1 million when it's the right time, because here's what I don't want to do. Some of those 12 are potential givers, not of 1 million, but of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And I want to ask the $1 million prospects when it's time and when it's the right person for $1 million. What I don't want to do is offend a $5 million donor by asking them for $1 million gift. And so how we do that is back to, actually, I guess what you're talking about next. And how do we equip our team? How do we give them the skills to do the job at the right time, by the right person, in the right way? So yeah, you want to walk a little farther down that road for us?
On how we equip our team?
Yes.
Yes. So this is a great quote by a Navy SEAL. Under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. And that's why we train so hard. And same thing applies when it comes to fundraising. The default is going to be falling back on the training. If there is no training, that's it's a gamble that you probably don't want to take. So some of the ways that we Stroman Associates, how we train our team, we want to resource. So all of our clients, we resource. Fantastic resource here, asking. My cover's a little different. It's the first edition. You want the one on the screen.
Hey, Aaron, we got to get you a current version of that.
I know. Oh, I have one over there. This has all my notes in it and highlights. But there's a process. There's a way that you can engage in approaching major donors. That's relational. There's a way that you can engage in fundraising where you feel comfortable in your own skin. It's not forceful. It's not like that kind of mafia mentality that Ken alluded to earlier, where there's threats of twisting arms or breaking elbows. And you can read about that in the book. There's some even analytical parts. If you're a bit analytical, 10 steps that you can take to approach, it's there on the cover, 10-step staircase when it comes to asking. And just another resource that we provide, the Asking Academy. This is where we bring teams, sometimes individuals, depending on the mode, but we do training with boards, with staff, and this we bring a conversational approach to fundraising. Equips leaders, volunteers to dramatically transform their results. Pretty in-depth. But again, what we see is we have in-depth training. That's what people fall back on when those stakes are high, when they enter into a capital campaign or have conversations with those donors that are high capacity and have a lot of potential. In fact, one of I think it's the very first Asking Academy. Here's a picture of all the attendees. There's one guy here. He in between sessions on our first day, he made a phone call, and he had a donor that he had a relationship with. Essentially, the pump was kind of primed. He gained some revelation, some skills through the training, and while we're there at the training, he made a phone call and got a donation that blew the rest of his organization away. And it was really fun as a staff to watch, in the Asking Academy, someone to put it to work in a very practical way there on the spot. And it was a donation that was just hanging out there waiting to happen. I didn't share. That's a success story. I was having a conversation last year with a guy who's the board chair. He was talking about the organization he's volunteering at with one of his peers. The peer said, "You know what? I think I would like to be a part of funding that organization and their mission." This board chair didn't know what to do. He didn't walk away with a pledge or a donation or a next step, even a next conversation. And he brought to me, he said, "Aaron, I probably need some of that training because here's what happened." And I was about to pull out my hair because I thought, man, that guy teed himself up for you. He's basically offering a donation and you didn't take it, because that's the training he had. He hasn't been trained on how to even receive a donation from an individual. And that breaks our heart. So we don't want that to happen. So that's why I think it's very important to equip your board, because you never know what opportunities are there. And that's what we usually find. We usually find there's plenty of opportunities right at the fingertips of the board. They just need to be equipped and trained to do it. And then when money becomes less of an issue and you can focus more on the mission, that's where advancement really takes place.
Well, Aaron, we've got some good news and bad news to share. Good news is 47-minute webinar lasts 47 minutes. Bad news is there are about 5 of those, or just a few of those minutes left. And I know we wanted to reserve some time for Q&A. And in just a moment, if you have a question, I think we're just going to keep everything in the chat box this time. So if you have a question that you want to share, and I wish we could go into a whole lot more depth, but I want to make sure that we answer questions that people have. Aaron, anything you want to say before we kind of segue into the Q&A?
No, let's open up for Q&A. Kelly's already asked a question. She asked, what do you do with board members who will not agree or respond to spending time on training / equipping and lack in-person meetings altogether?
So can I give a couple of responses to that?
Please do.
Okay, Kelly. I'm going to give you one. This is a little bit catty, but not entirely. So we'll start with that, and then we'll maybe be a little bit more practical. But sometimes with the description you've given, what we need to do is plaque them out. And what's plaque them out? We need to give them a plaque, thank them for their service, and make room for somebody who really is willing to make a contribution. Now, that's a little bit catty, but if that's the right solution,
that's the bottom line. Yeah.
So if it's somebody who is, let's say they're underperforming because they're under-equipped, who can hold them accountable? Already we said it's not staff. And Kelly, am I remembering right that you're in a staff role?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the tricky thing. There's no one willing to take on that accountability role, really, with certain people. And so how do you go about doing that, politically correctly in my role?
Yeah.
What else can I do?
Yeah. So what you can do is equip probably your most engaged board member to carry that accountability role. And I'll just give you an example. One of the things that we like to do early on is to establish expectations of service. So a one-page simple summary that this is what's expected of board members. And one example is to make a personal financial contribution at least annually. That's one of several things that are on the collective expectation. So step number 1, the board votes to adopt that. So that's where we say, this is how we act. Step 2, we ask, and again, when I say we ask, this is somebody on the board now goes and asks every member of the board to sign their agreement. So that moved from we to me. This is what I have then committed. And then the next step is assessing performance. And it's not going to be the next day, but after the board has adopted, the board member has agreed, then at some interval after that, usually it's someplace around 6 to 9 months later, we want to come back and say, okay, here's what we said we were going to do. Here's what we did do, or here's what we didn't do. And then in that same conversation, if it's compliant, how are we going to carry that forward? If it's non-compliant, how do you see that changing? And so again, Kelly, what you can do is equip members of the board to serve their fellow board members with that accountability feature. And then, like I say, if somebody says, I'm going to do less in the future and I haven't performed well, then that's where we want to give an opportunity for the person to make room for somebody who does want to be a high performer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So great question. Let's do this. Why don't we, I know we're kind of flying through some stuff today, but if everyone wouldn't mind sharing in the chat box, what is your biggest takeaway from today's most important point. Feel free to type that out in the chat box real quick if there's anything that you thought, man, this is really good, or oh, there, I got some work to do. I need to invest a little more time in my volunteers, maybe put together, maybe recruit better. Let's throw those out there. Preparing volunteers. Be honest when recruiting. Oh yeah. Don't dance around. Fundraising requirement. Again, I'm just going to go back when the intentional board recruitment is so important. There's some great standards to set in there. Always assume board members have good intentions, but don't have all the tools. Yeah. We found a lot of times what seems to be a difficult board member is just an under-equipped board member. And when they're trained, they become rock stars. Signed board agreement. Yes. Assessing the commitment of pre-boarding the board. Yep. Equipped often. Yep. Yeah, that's a good one. A lot of times we say it once and assume everyone remembers it. I struggle with that as a parent.
You're kidding.
I've already told you once, but people don't remember. I don't remember. And a lot of times in the board, when you get that initial training, but you start to learn the context and personalities and the leadership. When you revisit it, all of a sudden it will make more sense. There's more context there. Performance reviews. Yeah, that's a great tool to have.
Yeah, let me amplify Gene Block. And by the way, real treat to have you on the call today. We're talking about a champion's champion here, but she says, be honest when recruiting. Don't dance around the fundraising requirement. And I know Gene and I would both agree on this, regardless of what the expectations are, don't dance around them. There are two questions that typically I hear in the process of recruiting board members. Number one, how much time is it going to take? And number two, how much money is it going to cost? If the answer is none or little, go on record with that. But if the answer is different than that, be clear. In terms of generosity, personal generosity, we like to set the expectation that for those who join the board, we would encourage you in ordinary times to make the organization among your top 3 or 4 or 5 charitable interests. The absolute top one, if you want to do that, that's great. That's not our expectation. I had one board member say to me, I'm on 10 boards. He said, there's no way I can do that with all the organizations. I told him, I said, I understand. I'm not worried about the other 9. This is the expectation for this one. And, frankly, I don't know how a person can be effective as a board member on 10 different organizations, but that's their choice. We have expectations only for one organization, and that's ours. Somebody else, a quick thought, question, or comment as we approach the 47-minute mark. It's getting here way too soon. Let's see, what am I overlooking in the chat box? Anybody else, another thought, comment, or question as we get ready to slide into home plate?
Yeah, I think I'll kind of reiterate that point of, don't try to water it down, because if you water down the expectations, you'll attract leaders that want the watered down commitment level. And when you say, hey, here's our standard and it's high, believe it or not, there are leaders out there that's what they're looking for. They want to be engaged in a mission and bring significant leadership to it. And, the high commitment attracts the high impact leader. There's one other, how do you figure out what the giving amount should be? Oh yeah. Why don't you speak to that? And then we'll move on, Kent, because that's good.
Okay, the question, what's the right amount to give? And my belief is that no person can answer that for another person. All we can do is give a framework. And so back to what I mentioned, as a member of the board, we would encourage our board members to lead by example, to make a personal financial contribution, at least annually, and that in ordinary times that would place this charity among your top 3, 4, 5 charitable interests. During extraordinary times, those are times of crisis, or times of great opportunity, which today we live in times of great opportunity, we would encourage you to consider bumping that up and perhaps to the number 1, 2, or 3 level. Anyhow, another way to express that is give at a level that if your peers were to know the level of your support, that they would find it appropriate or inspiring.
Yeah, sometimes we use terms even to describe gifts. Are you giving reluctantly? Are you giving out of obligation? Are you giving generously or sacrificially? And using those words isn't giving an amount, but that way we're not telling people an amount, we're not setting an amount, but if we expect people to be generous, then let's give generously. If we want people to give sacrificially, that may look different from one person to the next. And I think those are appropriate ways to quantify that, if you will.
Very well said, Aaron. Thank you.
All right, what do we have coming up?
Coming up, wow, is this next week?
Next week for our Kansas City friends or those who would like to travel to Kansas City. Lunch and learn, getting in, how you can connect with anyone. Here's a quick edit. I had this on LinkedIn. Many of you probably saw it. I had it posted from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. I struggle with Lexdixia and caught the error. It's 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's only an hour and a half, not 2.5 hours.
And
but,
Aaron, something special about this.
Yeah, we typically have people bring their lunch. We're catering some Kansas City barbecue here locally sourced barbecue, which some would say is the best in the world. We have a nationwide audience, so we don't need to get into that debate right now. But we will have barbecue, getting in, how you can connect with anyone. So if, along the lines of fundraising and connecting with other people, feel free to register for this. Registration is required, but it's also free and limited. So shoot me an email if you want to get connected with that.
Josie, I'm looking for you. Gene, I hope you'll be there. Sarah, want to meet you in person. Jerry, come on over. Peter, it's a long drive. And Paula, can't wait to sit down some barbecue in Kansas City. What's next?
Next month's 47-minute webinar is leveraging your fundraising through storytelling. This is a great way to equip we're talking about equipping board more than just reciting a vision statement or a mission statement. To be able to tell a story is so much more powerful, especially when it comes to fundraising. We will do a mini workshop and help you develop a storytelling philosophy and actually develop a story in next month's webinar. So be on the lookout for that as well. That's one that we really enjoy. And then we have some trainings coming up. If you are interested in, okay, how can I get my board trained with, major donor solicitation? We have the Asking Academy Classic. This is for teams. It's on May 17th and 18th. It's on-site, in person, best for teams of 4 to 6. Registration is open now. You can, if you're interested just in information, again, just write the words Asking Academy in the chat box. I'll follow up with you. We also have the Asking Academy Express. This is more suited for the individual. This is in June. It's 14th and 15th. It's 2 half days in the morning on each of those days. It's virtual. You do it from your computer. Little condensed version of the classic. And again, put the Asking Academy in the chat box. I'll follow up with you. But great way to get equipped for raising some funds for your organization.
Serious dollars. Aaron, we're 30 seconds away from 47 minutes. I think to wrap up, we've got just one message. We want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being involved, engaged, and want to wish you every success as you engage others in high impact fundraising. If you have any complaints today, other than it was too fast, yeah, even that, any complaints, please share them with us. If you have compliments, please share them with somebody else. Hopefully there'll be somebody that you think would benefit from this kind of high impact, quick fast-paced training as well. So with that, if you want to stay online for the next 3 or 4 minutes, we'll be hanging out here. Otherwise, it's 10:47. Want to wish you all the best. Can't wait to see you next time.
Bye all. Thank you.
Bye, guys.